Thank you for joining JD Messenger, the show that shares knowledge and experience from global experts. Now, once again, your host, JD Messenger.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending upon when you're listening to this. I'm JD Messenger, and I've got a really fantastic interview with you today. We're going to be talking with author Richard Polak and his new book, Work Smart Now. And I want to preface this by saying that I think that this is a very important topic. If you've been paying attention to any of the news about what's been going on in the world lately, there's a real big shift taking place in the minds and hearts of people all over the world. This morning, I just read a report from the Conference Board, and they said that over half of the women with school-age children have left the workforce. That's an amazing statistic. There's another article about the van sales. You can't even buy a van. You got to wait 18 months, or RV sales, because so many people have decided that they love not working in the office, call it remote working if you want. Even executives who own corporations have headquarters in California. There's this guy who sold his building and now he's living and working out of his van because he loves it. So there's also a lot of statistics, and Richard will know this more, about engagement and absenteeism, or being present and being productive. And I think it's no surprise to those of us that have gone through what we've gone through with the pandemic that there's a big change in hearts and minds. And it's another big statistics you just recently, it's been coming out, is that people are leaving the workforce in droves. So what is going on? And this is why it's very appropriate to have Richard and his new book. I think it's very prescient, I said. Richard Polak is a 40-year HR executive, and I'm consultant, and I'll read about his bio. He's been a congressional advisor, a world leader in creating compassionate strategies to increase employee engagement and productivity. He's a globally recognized in the HR space. He's helped clients in more than 90 countries, worked with the vast majority of Fortune 1000 clients, and he merged his company in 2012, IBIS Advisors, and the IBIS Academy Conference, which was the world's longest running HR international conference, with Arthur Gallagher. Richard is a wealth of knowledge and information, which I think executives and CEOs, and I'm going to say particularly entrepreneurial leaders, need to listen to this. And I showed Richard my book. I said, Richard, I didn't just read your book, I devoured your book. If you can, you probably can't see it, but I mean, the pages that are marked and folded over and the notes, this book is a plethora of great tips. So without further ado, welcome Richard Polak. Richard, great to be here with you.
Yep. Thank you very much, JD. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
You've got beautiful trees in the background. Where are you? What's all that beautiful territory back there?
Well, we have a place in Oregon, and it's just beautiful and peaceful. And this is where I go to write and to think, essentially.
Great. Yeah, I love getting out in nature. Well, listen, we're going to do this in three parts for the audience here. I want to ask Richard who he is and what's his essence, what makes him tick, and then we'll talk about what did you learn in your journey. I call it your boon or your gift. And then the so what, what's in this book? What are you doing right now? And why should people care? So Richard, why don't you tell us a little bit about your backstory? Who are you? What's your journey? Where'd you come from?
Well, I came from a military family. I was an Army brat, grew up essentially all over the world, and learned about cultures wherever we went. And the longest place we stayed anywhere was 3 years in Germany, and remember that. And then my father settled in New York after he retired as a colonel in the Army. And then I was living there for 3 years. And then I said to my father, I was maybe 17, 18 at the time, and he said, when are we moving again? He says, we're not moving. And I said, well, what do you mean? He says, well, you see all these homes and all these people? They live there in these homes their whole lives. I said, what? What kind of life is that? It's a shock to me that people did that, right? So I grew up with a very eclectic background, always moving and learning. And that's what my life is about. And if I can pass on what I've learned, and particularly 40 years where I'm just starting to get good at human resources, that I collect it all and throw it out there and hope somebody will appreciate it. And people have, thank God. Yeah, the book was the #1 release on Amazon actually when it came out. So
I didn't know you were an Army brat. I went to the Naval Academy, and so if I knew you were in the Army, I wouldn't agree to do this interview. I mean,
Army Navy. We go to those games every year, right?
Yeah, I've moved like 15 or 18 times in my 40-year journey, and I remember when I was leading the re-engineering initiatives with Exxon USA. We all went to training with a guy named Michael Hammer, Dr. Michael Hammer, who wrote Re-Engineer the Corporation in the early 90s. I don't know if you remember that. But Michael said that change agents and re-engineering agents, that the best ones were military people. And he said even more so were submarine officers. And he said, I've never quite understood that. But after all the companies we've worked with, and I went up to him afterwards and I said, Michael, I said, the thing about being in the military is you have to learn to adapt. When you moved and changed, you tell me why do you think that you're good at HR and how it related to this whole moving and changing all the time?
Well, because it deals with people who move and change all the time. And the environment changes and adapts. And then no other time in our life, in my life, have we seen change that we've seen today that was thrust upon us, right, with this pandemic. And it's caused, just as you said, people to reevaluate their lives. Do I want to work? Half the women you said are now leaving the workforce who are children aged at school age. And there's more that are evaluating their lives for purpose. And compassionate productivity, which is the book is about, it has no better time than now to be implemented and to be understood as people, right? As human beings.
Yeah. So, the element of change and moving is an interesting one because you have to make relationships fast. You have to adapt to changing situations and so forth. Tell me, before we dive into the book, let's come back to that. Let's really get into the essence of Richard. I mean, why do you do what you do?
Oh boy, I just love people. I think if I didn't love people so much, I'd probably be in finance.
You can still be in finance and love people. Don't.
I know. I'm sorry. Just the finance people I know love finance is more than they love people. I remember when I was 16 and I evaluated I said, what am I going to do with my life? And I said, well, I don't want to be behind a desk all the time. I want to do something with people, and I don't want to have to work on the weekends. And then it came to me, this opportunity came to me as, wow, working with people, not behind a desk. I didn't want to initially work in an office all the time. And I did for most of my career, actually, because that was the time when most of us did do that. And then I didn't have to work on the weekends. And so that's what drove me to this job, I guess, or this position, this industry.
What was the first job you had?
I was actually a UPS driver.
Ah.
Yeah. And because it was outdoors, I didn't have to work on the weekends. And I loved it. It was great. Talk about discipline. In fact, I learned an awful lot about management there because I was not a manager. And it was the day in UPS where everybody that worked in the company had to be a truck driver, unless you were an accountant or a lawyer. Those were separate people. But everybody else in the firm had to start as a truck driver. So I started as a truck driver. Even before that, as a loader, it was my summer job, loading the trucks, those big rigs. And I learned a lot about how not to manage people. It's changed now, UPS. But they were screaming and yelling at me, get on that truck, get these trucks out of here. If these trucks don't move, we don't make money. And several of them were actually former Marines who were my supervisors. And those were the old days. Now people won't stand for that anymore. They will leave and they'll get other jobs because there are other opportunities, or they'll reduce their lifestyle. I have a friend of mine who said, I'm not going back to public company so that he worked for before, because he's just not doing that. He says, I'm going to reduce my lifestyle and work on my own.
Give us a quick scan of what happened in between the UPS driving position to now.
A quick scan is that after I left UPS, I found that wasn't for me. The environment of the UPS industry just didn't appeal to me. I wanted something more intellectually stimulating. And so I had a difficult time finding another job. And my father, who at that point left the Army and was working in New York for a fabulous consulting firm, the Siegel Company, said, I might be able to get you an interview with some insurance companies. Would that interest you? And remember, I'm 21 years old or 22 years old, and nobody wants to work for an insurance company when they're 22. I said, absolutely not. No way. I don't want to do that. And then I became kind of desperate because I couldn't find any other positions. And then I said, all right, Dad, if you can get me an interview, that'd be great. And he got me 2 interviews, one with MetLife and one with Aetna. And Aetna didn't want me. MetLife offered me a job for $12,500 a year, and I couldn't have been more excited to have that job.
Yeah.
And then that's how I started, and I grew into the field, and then worked for, because I knew you were Ernst. I worked for Deloitte. It was a time it was two CHROs. Became a consultant there in their actuarial and benefits consulting department, and then I left there to join Johnson and Higgins, which became Mercer, and then started my own company in the global space because I had more of an affinity to be global because of my background. And the company then didn't want to go global. They were very happy. They said, we only do global to support our domestic clients. And that's the only reason we have a global department. And I said, well, you don't know what's going on. China's going to be this was 20 years ago,
right?
More than that. China's going to be huge. It's going to expand. Global is going to be the biggest thing. Richard, go back to your desk. And so I went back to my desk and I packed my stuff. Yeah, right. Essentially, I've had CFOs say, get back in your box, even use those exact words to me. Went back to my box, basically packed it, and then said, I'm going to do this on my own. If you're not interested, I'll do it myself. And then I started IBIS Advisors, and then bought the company IBIS Academy and IBIS Information Services, then built that up and then sold that to Arthur J. Gallagher, which was sort of a cut and paste. It's a Fortune 500 company, actually did not have an international department. And then so they bought as a strategic investment my company, and then I ran the international department there for 6 years. So
what I hear is an individual who's been ahead of his time for quite a while. You know, I was doing a timestamp with you, you know, getting a job in the 80s. You know, I was an ensign in the Navy in 81. I made $11,000 a year, you know, and then in the 90s, I was an Exxon executive and joined EY in 95. And in 97, we globalized and I went to Asia. People were, you know, we're talking about creating global companies and global business processes and global customer databases and all that sort of stuff. I mean, as you said, this is going back over 20 years, but I think it's very important for our listeners who may not have the history and understanding, because it's important to understand history, how we got to where we are right now. You know, businesses and organizations used to be very functional. They used to be very silos. Countries used to be independent. And here you were in the late 90s talking about globalization, talking about China. Folks, I'm trying to point out to you that I think you ought to listen to Richard, because this guy's had his finger on the pulse of trends looking forward over the future. And I also like these a little bit of a maverick. He folded up his, you know, when he was told to go back to his box, he folds it up and says, no, I know what I want to do. I know what I'm trying to say. I know that this is right. And here we are in 2021, where the world is becoming, I don't want to say homogenized, but you might even say, and I don't want to say awakened, but the world is recognizing, you know, this is a very different time than 20 years ago. You know, people are very concerned about, you know, equality and justice and freedom and independence. They are very flexible and mobile. You know, I won't banter on much longer. So Richard, let me get to sort of part two here. Now that I understand and our listeners understand, what was it that you learned in that, 35-year sort of, 80s to 2018 or something like that? And how did that inspire you to, or why to write this book? Because I'm going to assume, folks, this book, as I said, is a plethora of facts. And let me give you a couple teasers, and we're going to talk about that in a second. But Richard's got stuff in here about focus, about engagement. He's got formulas on the business case, on absenteeism, on being present, and turnover costs. I mean, it is, as he said, he joked, Richard said, if I wasn't in HR, I'd been in finance, right? Well, that's because this book is loaded with facts and math and data. Okay, so the CFO, you ought to be reading this book and give it to the head of the HR or CEO. Richard, sorry I bantered on so long there, but I wanted to make the case for action on why this is good. So back to my question, what was it that happened, that sort of the boon, the gift, the gestalt, the aha, the major thing that you discovered in that 35-year period that led up to this book?
What I discovered was people are people, and they've always been the same. They want to be empowered. They want to learn. They want purpose. They all want good lives. They don't all necessarily want to be rich. But they want to have a good life, and they want everybody else to have a good life. What they don't want is somebody telling them what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and breathing down their neck to do so. When you start doing that, this is why I call it work smart and not work harder, because it's not at all about working harder. It's about, and the book's written for CEOs and CFOs and heads of HR for that very purpose, to identify and understand what I call compassionate productivity, that these are people just like you that want to be empowered. And if you do so, and you do so properly, you'll make more money. And there's case after case, as you said, JD, in the book that shows proof, the research and studies over, and half that book is full of studies that prove the point. And in every chapter, it shows the business case. Because if you're a head of HR, you can no longer go to your CFO or CEO and say, I'd like to do a wellness program because it's nice to have. You can't do anything that's nice to have in business, right? It will make people feel good. Now, if it doesn't make people, if it doesn't make money for the company, it doesn't belong in the book, frankly. It doesn't belong in the company. And there's ways to prove that making people feel good actually proves that the company will make more money. And there are many cases that show this in the book, and how it's in each chapter adds up to a company of 1,000 people, just a company of 1,000 service employees. You put each of these principles in place, and then you can also track it, and you have to track it, by the way. You have a foundation of a metric, and you track it 6 months later. A year later, you'll have an additional $330 million in revenue from 1,000 employees.
All right.
Those aren't my numbers. Those are numbers that I've extracted from the research, from others. And I've just put this book all together. Now, we all heard of wellness. We all heard of engagement. We all heard of absenteeism. We all heard of, well, many of us haven't heard of presenteeism, which is much more insidious than absenteeism.
Right.
But adding all these together, you get a prize at the end. Plus, you have a better life, and the employees have a better life. They become more loyal. There's just terrific opportunity here for people.
So let me a couple of things you pointed out I want to come back to. One was presenteeism, but I also, mindfulness and purpose and wellness. I'm a Ernst & Young retired partner alumni, and so they have various programs and courses, and they send them out every month. And I was shocked this month that I got an invitation to a mindfulness program and a life purpose program. And I was like, whoa, okay, this is really interesting. Ernst & Young is now teaching mindfulness and a purpose. I'm like, but this is essential. This is, going back to Stephen Covey, #1 best-selling leadership book in the world, 7 Habits for Highly Effective People. he told me in our interviews that 75% of companies have no idea what their purpose is. And I found that to be true. People need purpose. People want to feel well. You said they want to be empowered. They want to have a good life. They don't want to be micromanaged. And I loved what you said about work smarter, not harder. And I'm a math guy, engineer, math major. I love metrics. I love math, and I love measures. So I'm going to say again to those CEOs and CFOs and HR directors out there, this book is a plethora of facts and figures and statistics. And one of them is, besides on absenteeism cost and engagement cost, you mentioned presenteeism, which you said is more insidious. Tell us what you mean by presenteeism.
Okay, first I'll tell you the facts. It's 10 times as damaging to the organization as absenteeism. Okay, so you can imagine somebody being absent, what that does, right? It creates an empty space that somebody's not being productive and making revenue for the company. Plus it burdens others in the department to make up for that person who's not there. And then if the person leaves, it just goes on and on with absenteeism. Imagine 10 times the damage with presenteeism, which just simply means I'm not present at work. I'm sitting there, and you may as well be a zombie. Okay, you're working and you see them all the time, but you really don't identify what they're doing. And they don't even know it many times because it's unconscious. You can sit there doing a task and just typing away. And so many of us can do this. We can sit in a computer all day long and then get nothing done by the end of the day. That's called presenteeism.
I'm reminded of when you call somebody, the insurance company, the phone company, the utility company, and you ask them a question and they give you the answer and you go, no, I didn't ask you that. They can't actually even hear what you're saying if it doesn't fit into, column A, column B, column C. The brain is just not engaged. And I know that's just a minor example of what you said. Give us some, since I love numbers, and I'm assuming a lot of our listeners out here love numbers, and there's executives and CEOs of companies, throw out some more interesting facts here. So presenteeism is 10 times more damaging than absenteeism. You got some other great numbers to throw out?
Sure. Those companies, this is from the Gallup survey, right? And I think everybody's familiar with Gallup. They're a very reputable firm. As 17, those companies who are engaged, have engaged employees, have increased productivity 17% more than those who are not engaged. And presenteeism, the lack of presenteeism, or those lack the people that aren't present. And by the way, engagement and presenteeism doesn't just mean job satisfaction. They're very different. All right. You can be very satisfied with your job and still not be engaged in it. You can be happy to be sitting there at your desk doing as least amount of work you can and then go home. And then that's not engagement. Engagement is, and then I have an image of it, and you can imagine it, when somebody jumping in the air saying, I love this. I want to do this. I love this company. Now, you feel the energy coming from me from that, and imagine your customers feeling that energy.
Right.
How contagious it is for people around you. And then that increased productivity 17% on its own. So if you're going to encourage managers how to get engagement, and there's ways to do that too, and there's ways to measure it. By the way, measuring engagement is not that simple to do. There's statisticians that do this really well, and there's some that don't. And there are many who do it, and it's really careful how you choose it and the questions you ask. As you can imagine, you have those Myers-Briggs, you've got all these kinds of tools to measure how people think and what they should be doing. And it took years and years to get those in place. And so the engagement survey is the same way. You've got to get it set down really clear. You got to spend the right amount of time and money making sure the questions are asked very specifically, what the information you need to know. And then you have a foundation for it. And then you put an engagement program in place. By the way, your foundation, because you do your first survey. And your employees will tell you. One of the firms I was with came back, they did an engagement survey, and it was a broad thing, like, we're just going to do engagement survey because everybody else is doing engagement surveys. So they did an engagement survey, and it came back saying, and they reported back that you all were loud and clear saying, we don't communicate well enough to you. The leadership team doesn't. So we're going to communicate better for you. All right. Now, 6 months later, there's been no additional communication from the leadership team. All right. So what I'm saying is, and talk about accountable and measurable goals and outcomes, they completely failed. The management of the company did. But they're asking employees to be accountable and measurable outcomes, right? And that's not right if they don't also complete it. So the employees, from doing an engagement survey, were even more disengaged, because now they've realized now management doesn't even do what they said they were going to do. So all those things.
I'd summarize. I've got some more fascinating questions I want to get to, and maybe we'll have to do another part 2 of this, or a seminar or something, because I'm really excited about this. But it seems to me we can roll this up into a couple of buckets. One bucket is management and leadership versus staff, you might say. And there's a disconnect there. And I think that disconnect is that there's really a failure of a lot of leadership and management training, which, I don't know why. Maybe it's because there's the education level, the foundation of fundamentals that people have had has slowly been going down, down, down over 20 years. But then on the second bucket is on an individual bucket, and that is inside. There's this issue about the mind and the issue about the heart. I mean, some of the things you're talking about are about the mind, the ability to be focused, the ability to be engaged, the ability to concentrate. And some of the other things you're talking about the heart, that I care about what I'm doing, that I am cared for, that I am listened to, that I feel respected, and so forth. And so tell me, work smart, work smarter, not harder, is that sort of touching the head. But the book is really all motivated by touching the heart, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, that's a really incredible insight, actually, because I try to use both, and more the heart, because I also believe on a metaphysical level that thought is greater than actions. Feelings is greater than actions, because that's the precept to action. Your feelings and your thoughts are most important, and then action follows. If you do the other way around, then you're trying to catch up to your feelings and thoughts, or trying to put those in a square peg round hole that may not fit the action. So everything should come organically from your feelings and thoughts. And I was using statistics to get people motivated, trying to anyway, through their feelings and their thoughts. And that will drive everything else. If they can get excited, if somebody can get excited in reading this book and say, wow, I want to use this and make change in my company, then the action will follow very easily.
We could talk for an entire show about thoughts. I'm my friends and fans and everything at the Messenger Institute, everyone knows it's all about thoughts. It's about the inner game, and thoughts, as Gandhi said, and Buddha said, and Jesus, I think, said, some version, Henry Ford, if you think you can, you can. If you think you can or think you can't, you're right. Thoughts create your words and behaviors, which become your actions and deeds. So let's come to sort of wrapping up here, and I almost feel like we're just getting warmed up, but there's a lot of really good stuff here. What would you say if you had to get somebody's attention and you wanted them, to buy this book? I got all these different books I got to read. I've got very little bit of time. What kind of promise would you make? I promise if you read this book, if you do blank, you're going to get, blank.
Okay. Boy, that's a tough one, promise, because I'm not a big one promising without following through. So I can tell you this, what I hope that you gain from the book, at the very least, because there's a whole chapter on personal optimization in there. And that's the biggest increase in productivity when an individual can optimize their performance. I hope you can adapt 1 or 3 of those tips in there. And if you just tap into one and identify that productivity actually starts before work. And it starts with a good night's sleep. It starts with a good breakfast. It starts with some exercise routine. Then you'll automatically be more productive. And that's all the thought, some of the thought you were talking about. It's all prep. Productivity is pretty much all prep. If you leave there with that, then I'll be really happy that you get one thing out of the book.
Well, I love that. Also, somewheres along my journey, I learned first thing you should do when you wake up is have a glass of water, because your brain is dehydrated. Yeah, your brain's dehydrated.
You lose a cup and a half in your sleep.
Right. And so if you don't have water in your brain, you're not working good. And if you don't have nutrients in your brain, you're not working good. So first thing is you got to get your brain and nutrients and biological functions working so that then you can start using your head. What is there any other, open-ended here? Is there anything you want to say, any tips or points you want to make that, we haven't touched on so far?
But I think one thing to leave with is a quote I like to use: do only the things that only you can do. Okay? Do only things that only you can do. Somebody else should be doing everything else. Then you'll be the most productive. If it's something somebody else should do, you should be delegating it for someone else to do. You shouldn't be doing those things that you can do, but shouldn't be. Only the things that only you can do, people rely on you to do, and that only you can do. That'd be really helpful to any organization.
Okay. And then any other one?
Well, a big one for me is take a nap every day. If we're talking along personal productivity, absolutely. I take a 10 to 20 minute nap every day. And you just talked about regenerating the brain, because I just plug myself into the wall essentially and then recharge. That's really important. There's the good night's sleep, the breakfast, and so on.
Okay, great. Well, Richard, it's been an absolute pleasure. And again, the book is Work Smart Now, Work Smarter, Not Harder by Richard Polak. And there'll be a link to this at the bottom of the interview if you want to link to that. And I guess that's it. So thanks so much, Richard. It's been really fascinating. I'd like to follow up and do more of this. We're just getting warmed up.
Oh yeah, a great chemistry actually, and I hope there's more we can do together. JD.
All right.
Thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you. All right, to my listeners out there, thanks very much for being here. Good morning, good afternoon, and good night.